Just in case, yeah. I just wish they would edit them before they put them up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll do it when they put on the COCA website.
Yeah.
I love when my phone tells me robocaller. Like,
it is nice. Yesterday, my coworker got a call and it said it was from Pennsylvania. You know how sometimes underneath it says where it's from? Yeah. It said it was from Pennsylvania, but then it had a Chicago area code. So she answered in Spanish because she speaks Spanish. So she's like, if it's a robocall, I'm
going to confuse them.
I'm going to confuse them a little bit. And it ended up being somebody that we work with. They're like, I think I have the wrong number. Because she's not somebody who you would think would speak Spanish at all. So.
Right.
Here you go.
Hi, Dr. Gorlick and Dr. Livingston.
Hello. How are you guys?
I'm good. So just when y'all just did the keynote, we went over y'all bios. So I'm not going to go over them again, if that's okay with y'all.
Cool.
I'll give y'all a little more time to talk. So we'll start right at the top of the hour, or the half hour, I should say.
Excellent. Great. You've been over here?
Not in a while. I mean, before you and I did a talk here at one point, but that was pre-wall.
Yeah, this keeps getting more and more sophisticated.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like bigger screens and more setup each time I come.
Yeah, you know, sometimes they even have an iPad there as another view. You know, it's pretty crazy.
I just have my office all by myself. I don't have any tech support.
Oh, poor.
Just me and my laptop. No, I think it worked well. It seemed to be pretty smooth.
Oh yeah, it was so
Actually, the
nice.
sarcoma town halls we do from here.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I've seen you
More setup here.
and Nita and Aaron here in front of the backdrop.
Sorry, I dropped the microphone. If there was a bit of a bang.
No worries.
So I repetitively.
All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our session this afternoon with Dr. Andy Livingston and Dr. Richard Gorlick, understanding the long-term survivorship issues for pediatric oncology patients. And docs, when y'all are ready, take it away.
Yeah, no, obviously, thank you for the opportunity to speak to your group. And, we appreciate as an opportunity to speak with folks a little bit more informally and, take questions that folks may have. And obviously, we're happy to continue the theme of survivorship. And a lot of it is how, camps actually enhance that. We all know what we do is incredibly rewarding to us as individuals. We know from the feedback we get from the kids and the parents and, tears at the end of the summer that in many ways we're doing a great thing. But I think when you start thinking about how this is different from other camps, because whenever, every kid loves camp and every kid, or most kids love camp. And, at the end of the summer, they have this sort of same tears as they depart. But particularly for this group with a lot of special needs, that's not always the case. Like without sort of camps that provide specialized medical knowledge and specialized areas of focus, you'd have a lot of challenges in dealing with a variety of issues. So some of the issues that would be hard to deal with include, just a recognition of their sort of special medical needs. Creating, every camp has to deal with issues of, everybody treating each other with sort of a lot of respect, but at the same time, many of these kids have special needs. We all know cancer camps are special places where, regardless of folks, ability or disability, everybody's going through a similar journey, and, how they're sort of embraced by, their peers, as well as the staff and volunteers, is a big part of that sort of favorable experience. I've volunteered at camps a lot of years, but Dr. Livingston has as well. He's younger, so not nearly as many years as I have, but that's purely an age phenomena and not anything else. And these are special environments, meaning, we all create environments where we promote, a lot of the psychosocial safety that these kids need. I think if I was going to try to steer you guys in a particular way, I think that every camp I've been part of, has emphasized the fact that, camps, for kids with cancer are camps for kids, and you had to treat them like kids first. But I do think, it's critically important that some of the concepts around particularly exercise, I think as sort of society evolves, like we have a dichotomization of kids into kids who are a bit more athletic and kids who are a bit more sedentary. I do think kids with cancer, just because it's easier, tend to head towards the sedentary way. And this is a generalization. We all know, we have super athletic kids and, but I think, the fostering of the exercise side of things, just as a societal need, and this isn't only kids with cancer, is a huge issue. And maybe with that, I can turn it over to Andy for some opening comments and see what he thinks. I know you usually went to the rustic camp with the teens, but welcome your thoughts on all of this.
Of course, yeah, certainly happy to engage with everyone here, and as Dr. Gorlick was saying, kind of hopefully a little more informal format, and happy to take any questions about some of the things we talked about in the keynote lecture, or really anything about what's the role that camp can play in really promoting that healthy lifestyle and survivorship. So yeah, my experience with camp, eventually I'll get the same number of years as you if you stop and I continue. So eventually we'll meet up. But I first began being involved in the medical staff of camp during my training when I was at Duke, and then continuing here and working with a lot of the teenagers at the MD Anderson Camp AOK. And it's, as everyone here knows, it's just a phenomenal place to really engage and interact and really provide that opportunity and safe place to see the potential that each of these kids has. And for me, that was something really powerful, actually. Part of the reason I wanted to be an oncologist focused on taking care of teenagers was really based on some of the experiences I had early on in my training at camp, and just really that interaction. So I think also, as volunteers, as staff, as medical staff, it really is a big benefit and a lot that we can gain from that as well. So I didn't have a specific agenda for this session, really just wanted to have an opportunity to talk either about camp related things, of course, about medical aspects of care, whether that's around camp or kind of how we approach treatment of pediatric cancers, and then really thinking about how do we create that holistic view to make sure that these kids and young adults are successful long term.
So do you guys just steer us a little bit? Which direction should we go in terms of what would be most helpful for you guys to hear about? What would be most helpful for us to talk a little bit more about?
We have some shy people this morning, it appears.
Yeah. If you want to put it into chat, we're happy to.
Yeah, you can put it into chat. We'll read it off. You can unmute yourself and talk to the doctors. Your questions.
I'll ask something. Dr. Gorlick and Dr. Livingston, this is Jennifer with COCA. Many of our camps have some really good relationships with the treatment facilities that they work with, obviously, to get their patient population to come to camp. A lot of them too are continuing to work on their relationship. Is there anything that you think that we as camp organizations could be doing a better job in fostering a relationship with the hospitals that we work with? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, what's complicated in hospital systems is, we're big hierarchies with, a lot of bureaucracies. And sometimes it's a bit challenging to sort of work out actually who's the person you're supposed to be speaking to. I think the reality of it is, even though physicians tend to be sort of the front and center faces of programs, the reality of it is we fit into a couple of different roles. And, faculty spend most of the time seeing patients as their doctors. And they spend less time, to be honest, with administrative activities than you would think. Like Dr. Livingston will probably tell you, he does a lot of administrative time, but by that he means writing notes, entering orders, things that are involved in patient care and less sort of organizational leadership. Then from there, we tend to be the spokespeople. We tend to be the people who give the lectures because we do a lot of the academic side of things. But sort of understanding the structure of each of the organizations is sort of critical as a starting point. The simplest way to figure it out, because you got to realize, doctors, we're not business people, and not that there's anything wrong with business people, but if two business people are selling turkeys, they want to sell their turkey and not have you buy somebody else's brand turkey. Doctors, and I'm only saying that because I'm thinking about Thanksgiving, and cranberries and all that kind of stuff. And obviously it's because of the timing relative to that. Doctors don't think that way. You got to realize our biggest responsibility is to our patients. And what's nice about our profession in general is we're collaborative, because none of us want to do anything that would ever hurt a child with cancer. And to be honest, I want them to be aware of every option. Wherever is best for them is good for me. And to be honest, we're, again, it sounds terrible, but we're not incentivized actually to see patients. So we work in hospitals, we get a straight salary. Doesn't matter how many patients we see, our salary's the same. And that sort of promotes that whole behavior of where we're just kind of interactive people. So the best way to figure out who's the decision maker is just ask the doctors who's the person to speak to, and just be direct about it. Don't be shy. You know, if I started describing MD Anderson to you, I could spend an hour explaining the hierarchy that's sort of pediatrics. And, you know, I'm going to try to give the abbreviated version of, I am the head of the pediatrics. I have an administrative counterpart who works with me, Lisa Halfmeister. So she is the divisional side of it. And then within our divisions, we break into immediately the different faculty fields, but then support programs. So one whole huge group of pediatrics is the support programs led by a physician, physician administrative dyad. That's the word here. We use dyads for everything. And it's actually the administrative dyad to the support programs people that is actually the best contact for everything related to, you know, I want to come and have an event in the hospital. I want to be able to reach out to your patients directly. I want to be able to sign them up. I want to be able to interface. And a lot of that, you know, they'll help you guys with just the whole, like, you know, we have a lot of structure around, like, you can't go to the floor and just take care of pictures of kids because, you know, they have a right to privacy, and, you know, photographing them in the hospital labels, you know, them as a cancer patient. So you have to be careful about a lot of things, and there's a lot of rules that we all live by. But that's probably the best way. And to be honest, here it would be the director of support programs, but that trickles down to child life. Child life tends to, in a lot of hospitals, be your primary point of contact. At Montefiore, where I worked before 5 years ago, child life was the major point of contact for the camps because they organized a lot of the outreach programs. I do encourage engaging with the hospitals. Like, you know, camps have a lot of different structures. There's camps that are associated with one hospital and come out of it. And then that tends to have an easy integration because they're partnered. But there's other camps that associate with a lot of hospitals. And to be honest, I think the extent to which you can be visible on the sort of hospital campus, it actually helps a lot. You know, at Montefiore, one of the things we had was a day where all the camps came on site to have a fair so that parents could sort of take literature about the camp, as well as put their names on your list so that when you guys started mailing out applications, you had their email address and you didn't need us to reach out to them. And, you know, that helps a lot because it also, like you can imagine, the hospital won't give you our patient's email address, meaning that is a no-no. We are not allowed to do that. It's not they're being mean about it. We just can't do that. They have to give it to you. So, you know, the extent to which you can bridge yourself and provide materials to bridge, it really helps a lot. You know, I do know camps have both sets of problems. So we have camps where we have many more kids than slots in the camp. And we have camps where there's many more slots than there's kids. And it's kind of, it's fascinating that it goes both ways. But it does go both ways, actually.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So we do have some questions in the chat that I'll read off. What are specific things that we can provide at camp to assist with these long-term issues besides exercise?
You know, again, I do think a lot of it is socialization. That's the other big thing. You got to realize the cancer experience is isolating. So, you know, okay, so, you know, I struggled a little bit with answering the virtual question because I am, to be honest, as an older person, I'm not a huge fan of virtual education for kids. And I do have the mindset that this year was a challenging year for the kids of America. I do think a big part of school in general is kids need to interact with other kids. Interactions kid to kid is not the same as an interaction between a kid and an adult. So to me, I love groups that sort of persist beyond summers. There's a lot of camps that are maintained sort of means of these kids having either like a Facebook group that's an invitation only group or other means of interacting. You got to realize a kid in a family in a particular school, despite the adult prevalence of kids with cancer, if you think about it, in their high school, in their junior high school, in their elementary school, they're going to be the only kid in that school who's in general going to have cancer. There's going to be a rare circumstance where there's two just because of the frequency, but most of the time it's just going to be one. So these kids feel like they're different. And to be honest, camp is all about, to me, well, you're different, but you're not alone. And to be honest, I think it's that socialization. I kind of alluded to, I do think, kids in the pre-era, and I'll put myself in this category, some of us got lucky just because we had a lot of social support and a lot of families that helped us through this and provided what we needed. But that's not uniform. Folks have different instincts. Folks have different reactions. Folks have different, support systems. Camp becomes one of those support systems. I don't know. What else do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, of course, the physical activity and fitness is one piece of it, but I actually think maybe that's a small piece. And, of course, all of us who've engaged in camps have seen some of these other benefits firsthand, really looking at that psychosocial support and support network. And I think normalization, that sense of normalcy is something that's just so huge, where there's not a stigma about, whether or not you have hair, whether you look different, whether you need to go get your medications, everyone lines up for meds. So it's like, oh, it's time for meds. We're all doing that, So I think that normalcy piece, the peer support and connectivity, but also it is kind of an opportunity for a break or some respite oftentimes too, for families or even for siblings. So I think there's an opportunity there, where camps can use it. I mean, to support families beyond the child themselves. I think these are some of the critical pieces that we're providing in that camp environment. And I really like that idea about how can that group or that support structure extend beyond that physical time and space. And so that, again, I kind of mentioned a couple of these studies in the talk, but we know like for physical fitness, even that kind of focused, making physical activity and things fun is engaging, and that can extend beyond. But I think that same is true about that social networking and peer support. I think that's a great opportunity to make those connections through camp and hopefully have those continue.
Perfect. Another question we had, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the population that is most underserved. If we were to expand our services at our camps, what is the population we should focus on, in your opinion?
Yeah, my advice on that is always to be needs blind, to the extent you can be. I think it's reasonable to acknowledge that, folks who are socioeconomically disadvantaged aren't going to have alternative options. So there are families that are going to, when there's kids with cancer, they may still opt to send their kid to a summer camp for kids who don't have cancer, and that opportunity may exist there depending upon their child's interests and their child's sort of areas of focus. Meaning most often when I see that, it's when a child has a very specialized area of interest, like they want to go to computer camp or, a camp that sort of, meets a special interest, and they don't feel like the cancer diagnosis will be a challenge. That said, I do think diversity in camp is a good thing. And I think, having folks come from a variety of backgrounds is always helpful. My approach to medical care, my approach to this is, to the extent possible, take care of everyone. Anybody who wants the service should be, offered it. I certainly wouldn't want folks to deny access to people who lack resources. They need the help more. And obviously, some of what, I think some of what you have to think about is the challenges of people who are under-resourced utilizing even camps that are free. One of the things we faced, camp in New York was, kids from the Bronx being able to get to camp. Are you going to provide bus service, which, for those kids, that could have been limiting. And obviously we did provide bus service because otherwise there wouldn't have been the capability of getting there. But certainly there were parents who drove their kids and that was not something they needed, and that's fine too. So I think you just be needs blind to the extent you can.
Perfect, thank you. I believe Tammy had a question.
Hi. I guess it's not so much a question as just a point for discussion, maybe. I think the majority of us have bought into the idea, that the socialization piece is so important. I mean, that's why we all do this, is to provide an opportunity for kids to come and be normal kids and not have to deal with that. I think the problem we've had fairly recently, and it's always a problem, is we have a lot of, as a lot of groups do, a lot of our counselors are survivors, and they're now getting horrible complications from secondary. We just lost one of our counselors at 30 to a secondary cancer. We have a counselor who had to have a heart transplant. We have a long-term camper who just couldn't get transplanted because of her GVHD and just died on an LVAD. So these kids are very aware of this, particularly during COVID, and we can't get together in person. And I think, the secondary cancers, and not just even relapses, but the secondary cancers is terrifying to them, and trying to figure out, that we can do all the fun we want at camp, but it's still there when part of our staff and, part of the camp family are dying from this. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or I think it's an issue that we're dealing with a lot.
Yeah, no, I understand. We've had the same challenges, meaning we had, one of the counselors who's beloved has, worsening cardiac function that's requiring more and more medical intervention. And, it's sort of heartbreaking, and is one of the challenges we face as, peds oncologists. The former division head of pediatrics, the person who I replaced, actually has made her laboratory career, now that she's not division head, really focused on sort of the medical side of this and trying to figure out issues specific to cardiomyopathy. I think, what I was trying to say out loud a little bit about my, own experiences, when we think about trauma, which is how I would think about the cancer experience, trauma in of itself is a problem. Trauma typically, does not make folks better. It usually causes psychological challenges. We couldn't go through every sort of outcome of, sort of childhood cancer, but PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is certainly something we see in kids with cancer. That said, I'm not aware of a model where ever not addressing the trauma head on is sort of the right approach. Meaning, no matter what you're facing, you have a better likelihood of facing it effectively if you're aware of the issue and learn how to deal with the stress of it. The classic teaching in, suicide, somebody who's suicidal, what you train physicians and counselors to do is, as soon as you suspect somebody may be suicidal, the worst thing to do is not bring up the topic. You actually have to say, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Because that kind of gives you a sense of how bad the risk is. So what I would say is, just like everything has to be age appropriate in peds, I'm not really talking about, a 5-year-old hammering home their fertility issues when they have no idea what you're talking about and think babies come from storks. I'm not saying that, but as they grow up, I think it's important for them to be aware of their own medical issues. And they have to be aware that, choices they make are going to influence their subsequent life, and they just have to sort of decide about this actively. Again, this is getting way too individual, but I had anthracyclines, meaning, I know exactly what it means as an oncologist. Obviously, when I got hypertension, I started treating it very aggressively, very early, understanding that this is probably a bit bigger of a risk to me than it is even to the general population. I don't like that reality, but it is what it is. And the extent to which you can function despite it and transcend it is really going to decide where you're going to get. Like I said, I do go back to the statement. Most folks in response to trauma don't do better. Most people in response to trauma do worse. And so it's not surprising that we see these challenges, but I still think you have to be open to speaking about it, particularly as they get to adolescence and become counselor age. They're starting to make life decisions that are going to have big impacts on their adulthood. And to be honest, we all know the teen adolescent years are, epitomized by a number of high-risk behaviors. This is not the time to indulge in all of those. To be honest, our patients have a lot of pulmonary issues. I am frank in patients and will say, I prefer you don't illegally drink or legally smoke, but if you do one and not the other, please drink and don't smoke. Just aware that that's happening. So they have to be aware and make choices. I know it's a long-winded answer. I don't know. Andy, what do you think?
I'll probably be more brief. But Tammy, I think the point you bring up is really important, and we see it in different ways. So, I think that experience of being a counselor is so meaningful, for programs that are established that way, where you were a kid at camp and then you have an opportunity to serve as a counselor, because the campers really look up to that and that experience. But that's what makes those challenges even more difficult to process, those connections amongst the counselors, amongst the kids and the counselors. But this is an issue that we see relatively frequently, and particularly like in our young adult support group, where patients are now several years out and just have issues just like you described. And one of a couple of things does happen. Of course, there's the incredible sense of loss. So some patients may react to that in thinking about their own mortality, right? That uncertainty that even when I'm 10 years past this, am I always going to be looking over my shoulder for recurrence or a health issue? And also, another phenomenon we see really often too is something that's called survivor guilt. Like, hey, we had the same cancer, we got the same treatment, and here I am doing well, and here's someone else who's really struggling. And I just bring these two ideas up because it's something to be aware of and to acknowledge, and something that's been pretty effective, because these things are traumatic. I think to the extent you can, here we have some really talented social workers who help facilitate like our support group and who are actually engaged as part of our camps. So we've even established kind of more formalized debriefings or processing when something really traumatic happens, like, if someone is lost, unexpectedly, like some of the situations you were bringing up. But I think the other thing we see is that particularly amongst, teens and older. I mean, there's already a lot of awareness of this. I think to Richard's point, not that anybody would cover up or not acknowledge it, but I think a lot of times these teenagers are much more aware of their situation, their risks, and their mortality than sometimes we want to give them credit for. And it's when you open up to talk about that or create some safe space to say, how's that impacting you, that you'll hear a lot. But yeah, I think it's an incredibly important and ongoing issue, right? Because, again, you're 5, 10, 15 years past your cancer treatment, but then you're still having to think day to day. And, then it's like, if you have a minor ache and pain, of course, you still have this idea of like, could that be related to my cancer? Yeah.
Oh, Tammy, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. No, I appreciate that. I think, we do talk about it a lot. We have a lot of kids who, we just had a funeral last weekend for one of our campers, and people that came said, geez, she was 10 years out. How, now we're gonna, same thing. Is that gonna happen to me? And I guess I'm curious. So I'm one of the medical coordinators for our camp, and I'm a advanced practice PICU nurse. So I just dabble in oncology. So I'm wondering if in the oncology world, I know, I've been I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have long-term survivorship clinics, and those all got started and now they're going. But I don't hear as much, because I agree with you that I think, the issues of mental health and PTSD is huge for parents too, and for siblings. And, so I'm just wondering, like, what kinds of services are out there on a regular basis besides us? We run teen programs, we run young adult programs to try to give people an opportunity to come together and discuss these issues. But from a medical side, of intervention, I'm just kind of curious of like where the field is going with not just doing neurocog testing on the kids, once a year to see how they're doing, and saying, oh, there's a problem, we'll send you to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But is there some kind of ongoing attention to the real effects of PTSD on these kids as they're trying to become functioning adults and make decisions for themselves about fertility and about, all those issues?
Yeah, no, I think the most common approach that's taken is support groups, and a variety of support groups that are broadly advertised. So if you look in the MD Anderson community, there are support groups that bring together teens. There's support groups that bring together parents whose kids are on active treatment. There are support groups that bring together parents whose kids are off treatment and alive. There are support groups that bring together parents whose children have passed away. So every sort of type of, group that sort of, you can imagine interacts. Those are always facilitated by psychologists typically, or social workers, or both, most often by sort of dyad groups. There's an AYA group, which is the YAC, Young Adult Advisory Council. But I think they like yak because it sort of sounds funny. I think this is an issue that folks are very aware of. Scanxiety is heavily written about. Every time you bring back somebody to a sort of survivorship appointment, it's a little bit of a reliving of, all the sort of stresses associated with it. That said, most would tell you you're supposed to maintain annual follow-up with somebody who's devoted to survivorship once a year. Yeah. That's the sort of, national recommendation. And a lot of it is following a lot of the things we alluded to, cardiac health, pulmonary health. As always, medicine focuses a little bit more on the medical problems than the psychological. But those tend to be the major emphases of those kind of clinics, and they help. And psychosocial support is offered. It just requires a little bit more of a proactive approach to engage in it. So I don't think we always get everybody who needs help. We get the ones who are willing to identify themselves as needing help, which isn't perfect, but
Yeah,
That's what it is.
Yeah, you asked a little bit about where's the field going, and I agree, and I think that's part of the evolution of survivorship care, and part of what I was trying to highlight some in the talk is that we're really starting to move beyond just thinking about the physical well-being and then to the mental piece. And but I think practically, how do we do that beyond social support groups is, what are those touch points for patients? But a lot of young adults, even when they're cancer survivors, they don't see medical providers often. We have a hard time getting a lot of them to come back once a year because they're in a different place geographically or financial. There's these other barriers. So some of, where the field's going, one is trying to understand, how does this change over time? What is that journey and how do things change longitudinally? Because sometimes there's these issues immediately at the end of treatment when you first go into kind of surveillance. But sometimes these issues crop up, anxiety and depression and PTSD many years later, and it can be so varied. So we're trying to understand, how does that change over time? Trying to incorporate that more into those touch points and visits they are having. And so that's like when the clinic we established here, we said the most important person on the team is the social worker. And it's so true. I mean, I feel like what I provide as a medical provider is important, but I mean, if they're only going to see one person, I'm like, you need to see the social worker. And not everybody needs everything, but we made it an opt-out. Because it used to be a system where it was triggered. Oh, the medical provider identified a mental health issue, so we're going to call social work. And when we inverted that, we went from having 30% of patients having psychosocial needs to like 90%, which is perhaps not surprising. And then some of the research we're doing that's kind of cool is trying to figure out, how do we capture teens and young adults if they're not coming back, or how do we make this more accessible? So one of the research projects, as an example, that we're working on as a multi-institutional collaborative thing, is looking at using some app-based voice recognition software where patients can go on and record different dialogue, and it can analyze these metrics and basically tell you who are patients experiencing stress and distress. I mean, they still have to engage, but it's something where they don't have to be at the hospital. They don't have to necessarily be at that visit. And it's kind of a self-guided piece. And then if it triggers, then it would flag, one of us or a mental health provider to be able to reach out and say, hey, how are things going? How can we support you? So I think that's one of the big challenges, is how are we really going to do the outreach? It's easier for the patients who are here in our clinic, but harder for those patients that maybe aren't getting that follow-up.
And I would also say the field recognizes there's not enough providers. So if you look at the national level, there's a lot of areas where there's nobody really comfortable caring for, survivors of childhood cancer. Most internal medicine docs don't have experience with this, and, they find it challenging. A lot of folks go back to the cancer center they were treated at, but that's frequently not convenient and tends to, particularly in teen years, lead to huge gaps between appointments because as they're going through college and life, that's not always their priority. So there's a huge outreach effort to teach more providers to be comfortable about this.
Thank you. So some more questions we have. Are there specific types of exercises that best address issues a survivor will face?
That's a great question, because we still have a relative prohibition on weight training. So, what people will say is anything that forces you to hold your breath and push puts a lot of strain on your heart. So like bench pressing, it's probably not the best idea. So when we're talking about exercise, we're talking about anything that's cardiovascular. So, swimming, exercise, bike, running, walking, anything that's cardiovascular, but not weight training. Weight training is probably not the best. And actually, in the early days, we sort of prohibited it. I think we're becoming more lax on that, realizing, if somebody's truly an athlete and they want to weight train, that's probably okay. It's probably not okay for somebody who's obese, hasn't moved in a year, to start bench pressing. That's probably not the best way to start. Probably better to walk first.
Yeah. I'll frequently tell patients, this is not the time to like take up CrossFit or set some new squat records. But Practically, when we looked at like what's the exercise that brings health benefits, it's actually not that much in terms of what's needed. It's really moderate cardiovascular activity 2 to 3 times a week, and really that's the equivalent of doing like a brisk walk. So I think we all know this. Any of us who've struggled with diet and exercise personally, of course, you have to make plans that are achievable. So signing up for like 7 days a week, may not get it done. So I think it's really just trying to meet patients where they're at and really encouraging that idea that any exercise is better than no exercise. And really the health benefits start with a pretty low threshold. I mean, kind of that moderate brisk walk 2 to 3 times a week. Even then, you're already going to be building back some of the strength and having some of those cardioprotective benefits that we're talking about.
But I think in a camp environment, you can think about things practically. Every camp is a little bit different. If you have a canoe, think about letting the kid paddle the canoe instead of the adults paddling the kids. It probably is equally safe, probably a little bit scarier for the adults, but it's probably better for the kids if they do the paddling. If you think about anything that's activity, if they provide the power that drives the activity, that's probably better. And then it doesn't matter what it is. Any sport type thing from, organized sports to dodgeball to anything that sort of anybody does it's all good.
Great. The next one we have is, do you have high utilization of palliative care teams, since it is better now that is not an end of life, but quality of life focus? And can you help identify goals and risk for the patient?
So the concept on palliative care has evolved. So almost like what Dr. Livingston spoke about in terms of opting out versus opting in, is the way we think about integrative medicine and not palliative care. So in the olden days, there was this concept that, you come in, we're going to cure you, and then all of a sudden we can't cure you, and now you're palliative care. I think that view has been replaced with a view that there's always symptom management. So when you come in the door and you're a newly diagnosed cancer patient, the emphasis of the care is the cancer treatment. But at the same time, you still need your medicines to fight your nausea. You need your medicines to treat whatever side effects you're having, whatever they may be, to the extent they can. So if you have pain because of where your tumor is, we need to treat that pain. If you go through a sort of typical cancer journey where the kids are heading to cure, that sort of level of symptom management stays the same. But there's folks where the course doesn't go the way it should. You may still hope to cure them, but let's say they recur. All of a sudden, rather than viewing this as the onset of palliative care, it's like a triangle where the emphasis on symptom care becomes more important relative to the emphasis on treatment-directed cure. And at some point, the probability of being cured, unfortunately, may be so low that what matters most is really the symptom-directed part of the treatment. So our integrative medicine program as a goal meets every patient from the time of diagnosis, and is sort of there through the journey. And there isn't a transition of now you move from oncologist to palliative care. It's just who you spend more time speaking with. So now that we don't have as much to offer that's curative, maybe those docs should be more of the discussion. And so palliative care is part of integrative medicine, but integrative medicine encompasses support programs that aren't related to end of life. Is it important to address end of life issues when end of life is occurring? Absolutely. Huge initiatives exist around sort of having conversations around goals of care. What's the goal of your treatment now? And, we know classically peds oncologists are not the best at, there was a classic study done out of Boston led by this person, Joanne Wolf. And what she did very simply was a survey of how peds oncologists thought they did in terms of anticipating parents and patient wishes, and asked the patients and parents the same questions. And as you could imagine, the peds oncologists thought they all knew exactly what their patients and families wanted. And to be honest, they rarely did. That was a study about a decade ago. We're maybe getting better, but that's still a challenge. Obviously, the most important wishes are the parents and the patients. That's what matters most. But that's how we think about it. And is there high utilization? Yes, because they meet every single new patient. So, it doesn't tie to the number of kids who aren't surviving.
Great. So another question we have is, how are you able to keep your AYAs motivated to continue to attend?
So you, Andy.
We're putting you on the spot now.
Good. It is certainly a challenge. I think for so many reasons, of course, many young adults being in whatever transitional phase physically or mentally and where they're at along their journey. And it's interesting because you'll see some teens and young adults really engaging heavily when they're going through treatment, but others who really are never accessing those type of support groups. But then they really plug into that once they're done with their cancer treatment. And so it's really on that spectrum. I think it's really just about providing the opportunity and the continued outreach. So some of the things we do, of course, is raising awareness of the groups and how they exist. The second piece, pre-COVID, we had a support group that met, monthly in person, outside of the hospital. We switched that to virtual. That's been actually very successful because, one thing we see is that even introverts who maybe don't want to talk much, it's easy to hop on Zoom and just listen. And that can be a really meaningful experience as well. So I think actually access and kind of adherence or motivation's actually been better because virtually, you don't have to get in your car, you don't have to plan ahead, and so there's better attendance. And then I think it's one of the other strategies is providing kind of a diversity of opportunities. So, of course, we have support groups that function very much as a social work or psychologist-led group for processing and peer support, but also we try to create more and more opportunities to engage in other social activities, and much in the way that camps happen. So for teens and young adults, creating things they're interested in. So if it's getting together to make gingerbread houses or do painting or whatever. And that of course has been a little more challenging with COVID, but fortunately we've been able to work with different programs where they'll send out all the art supplies to 20 people or however many people, and then they can still hop on Zoom, and it's kind of like one of those painting things. We were able to do a cooking class. There was a jewelry one. I don't know, some of these experiences. So I think kind of providing different settings and different opportunities is probably the best for engagement, but also then readdressing and remembering that just because someone wasn't interested or engaged at a certain point, that can change over time. So just because someone said no before, you don't have to spam their email 1,000 times, but letting them know that it's there is helpful. One thing that we haven't found to be too helpful, so we don't really do, is really a lot of more specific directed patient messaging through like texting and things. Of course, there's rules around texting, but similarly, young adults have told us, look, I don't need like another email or another spam, but something that can make me aware of what's going on. So, so now part of how we've done that is try to create an event calendar that people can access regularly, whether that's on social media or other places, so people can see what's going on and then kind of choose how they want to engage.
Great. Thank you.
At MD Anderson, they have a whole wellness program for the faculty and the staff. And, to some extent, I think some of the principles are the same, and just keep the programming diverse. My wife made me go to the class on microgreens. I wasn't really thrilled about it, but it was interesting.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions for the docs while we have them?
I had one last question. knowing that a lot of our brain tumors are long-term survivors, many of them are still living at home with aging parents and trying to figure out what care they will receive after their parents are deceased. What kind of conversations are you guys having as a healthcare team around just being aware of these survivors living independently? And I'm aware of, facilities for young adult autism, but I was just wondering, what kind of conversations are you having or hearing about having maybe some kind of facility for these kids that are going to need long-term care that will no longer be able to live at home?
Yeah, that's such an important, but at the same time, such a complicated question. So one of the huge clinics that are here is a clinic led by Dr. Slopas, which specifically focuses on kids who have, they're young adults, but they have neurofibromatosis, and these folks get different kinds of tumors, and it's a genetic condition, but, as a baseline, intellectual functions a little bit below average to start with, and then what they get makes it worse. The problem is there's no global answer, because the options for those folks vary so much based on what family supports may exist and what exists in the healthcare system in the region they are. Different areas, there's no standard in terms of what's available in terms of home services versus group home services, what's needed to access those services. So I've never seen, despite having a lot of visions around a lot of things that work well and are getting better, I don't see a coherent strategy on this that allows me to give you a consistent answer. Really, my career, I've worked for 3 institutions: Memorial Sloan Kettering, Montefiore, and MD Anderson. And the approach each took was completely different, and really suited to, basically the patient population they served and the regional resources that were available in each of the areas. This is so heavily dependent on family supports. Obviously, families' continued engagement, to the extent it's feasible, is usually the best option. I'm aware in a lot of cases of siblings taking on that responsibility, sometimes with financial support from the parents that's left for that purpose. But there's no right answer here, and it's complicated. Neurofibromatosis, it runs in families. So the problem also is it tends to be multi-generational. So, the parents are dealing with the same condition as the child. So can be immensely challenging.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And Dr. Gorlick, Dr. Livingston, thank you for your wealth of knowledge you share with us here today. And thank you for joining us on our COCA convention. Sorry we couldn't be in person, but we're all healthy and safe at home.
Yeah,
so
thank you guys so much. Obviously, appreciate it, spending the time, and have a good rest of the day. And thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We appreciate you very much.
Same here.